The story begins with a fisherman in Irish waters doing his job. He pulls up the net from his boat and realizes he has caught a woman. Syracuse approaches her and calls for help on the radio, but no one responds, so he releases the woman while asking if she is okay. He gives her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and manages to bring her back to consciousness. She asks why she is alive, and he found her in his net. Syracuse takes the woman inside the boat and tells her she needs to go to a hospital, but she refuses, not wanting to see anyone. The man asks her name, but she says she doesn't know, so Syracuse assumes she may have lost her memory in the water. On the way, Syracuse again mentions taking her to a hospital, but she begs him not to, so he tells her he knows a place where knows a place where knows a place where knows a place. One will see her. They arrive at the house of Syracuse' deceased mother, and the woman tells him she should be dead. Syracuse offers her his lunch and then leaves to pick up his daughter Annie, who has kidney failure and needs weekly dialysis in the clinic. Syracuse tells his daughter a story about a fisherman who was working until he caught a girl in his nets after Annie's dialysis. The clinic gives her an electric wheelchair. They head to her, the home of his ex-wife Maura and her partner, Alex, to leave Annie with them. Syracuse returns to his mother's house and finds the woman there. They talk, then board the boat to go fishing. While fishing, the woman says he can call her Ondine, which means woman from the water. Syracuse sets some traps to catch something but has no luck. Ondine starts singing in a strange language, causing him to catch several to her singing, and says she brings him luck. Later, Syracuse asks Ondine for help with the lobsters, and she asks what he does with them. He replies that he just sells them. Syracuse returns a couple of lobsters to the water, explaining to Ondine that he is saving them for a rainy day. Syracuse and Ondine get into his car, and he tells her he plans to share luck, but Ondine mentions that she does not want to see anyone and leaves. Syracuse sells the lobsters and buys Ondine a dress as a thank you for her help at the store. He takes advantage of the seller being distracted and steals more clothes for Annie. Later, Syracuse picks up Annie and agrees to race with her, while she uses her wheelchair. On the way, he continues the story from the other day, mentioning that the woman sang on a boat. Annie says that maybe she is a seal woman. Syracuse drops Annie off at her house, but she grows curious about her father's story and decides to follow him. Meanwhile, Syracuse returns to Ondine. He gives her the clothes, and she kisses him on the cheek and thanks. Syracuse asks Ondine how long she plans to stay at the house, and she says it depends on him. He tells her she can stay forever if she wants to stay forever. Syracuse gets back in his truck while Annie watches from afar. Suspecting that her father is hiding something, she decides to go to the library to learn more about seal people. Meanwhile, Syracuse goes to church to confess how long he has been sober and that he stole clothes from a store. The priest disapproves, but Syracuse mentions the clothes were for a woman he pulled out of the water. The priest asks him to keep him updated on the situation. Moments later, Annie is researching stay people known as Selkis. While Ondine is tidying up the house, Annie goes to her grandmother's house to continue her research and meets Ondine. The girl says her father told her a story about her and asks if she has magical powers. Ondine dodges the question, so they introduce themselves. Annie tells her she already knows about her life as a seal if they are to be friends, and Ondine agrees to chat with her. Meanwhile, Syracuse is in the library asking for books about Selkis, but the librarian says they have all been borrowed by his daughter. Later, Annie meets up with some friends who ask to borrow her wheelchair, but one of them throws it in the water, making it stop working. Annie decides to take it to her mother's park. Elsewhere, a man watches the seascape and then leaves. Moments later, Syracuse invites Ondine to go fishing with him, and he asks her to take the helm. However, she becomes scared when she sees a motorboat pass by. Syracuse tells Ondine that he doesn't think she can steer with her foot, so she starts singing to attract fish to the net. Syracuse pulls up the net and tells Ondine it's odd because you catch salmon with the teeth of net he's using. Minutes later, the motorboat approaches the fishing boat, and Circus asks Ondine to hide the guards board to inspect and realize that Circus managed to catch a large amount of salmon, suspecting him of using an illegal fishing method. They try to figure out how he did it until they find Ondine, who explains how Circus caught the fish. The men don't entirely believe her, but decide to leave. Circus asks Ondine if she's okay, and she says no. Then he asks if she wants to sell the salmon in the village, explaining that it no longer matters a lot if people see her, since the guards already have. They sell the fish at the dock, and then meet up with Annie to go to a clothing store. Annie helps Ondine with the clothes and asks her father if selkies were clothes. But Circus just laughs at her theories. Minutes later, Ondine comes out of the dressing room to ask his opinion on her outfit. But they soon realize that the townspeople are observing the woman's beauty. The next day, Annie visits Ondine, and they talk. Ondine asks if she knows how to swim, to which Annie replies no. Ondine offers to teach her, saying it would be very relaxing. Meanwhile, Circus goes to his ex-wife's house, where Mora tells him that Annie has already gone to her grandmother's house. She then asks if his water woman lives there. Circus dodges the question, mentioning that he wants to keep his daughter all day since the festival starts at 3. Mora asks if he will take Ondine as well, and sarcastically comments that they will surely go looking for pearls in the water back with Ondine. She teaches Annie how to swim, but they soon find something covered in seaweed. Annie explains that it's probably her seal skin, and suggests they bury it so she can stay on land for 7 more years without having to return to the water. Later, Circus, Annie, and Ondine are on the boat to watch the festival. On the way, Annie keeps mentioning that she is sure Ondine is a seal woman. When they arrive, Annie continues to bother Ondine by saying she is a selkie, seeing that Ondine keeps denying it. She throws herself into the water to test her. Ondine dives in to rescue Annie and brings her back to the boat, and tells her father that Ondine can breathe underwater. Later, Circus takes Annie to Moa for being neglectful, but he decides to ignore her as he leaves. Circus and Ondine arrive home, where he reveals that he and his ex-wife were alcoholics for years. He decided to stop drinking for Annie's sake, but Mora didn't like it and kicked him out of the house. Ondine asks why he doesn't stay with Annie, and Circus explains that the government believes his daughter is better off with her mother. Circus then moves closer to Ondine for a met encounter. Afterward, he asks her age, but she doesn't answer. Moments later, Circus returns to the church to confess. He tells the priest that Ondine brought him a lot of luck, and he fears losing her not just for that reason, but because he is starting to fall in love with her. As he leaves the church, the man who was watching the sea the other day approaches Circus and asks what he calls the woman who is always seeing with him on the boat. Circus doesn't answer and leaves in his truck. Later, Circus accompanies his daughter during her dialysis and then takes her to Mora, but when they arrive, they realize his ex-wife and her partner are not there, so they decide to go out and look for them. Meanwhile, the same man who bothered Circus goes to the house where Ondine is staying. She notices his presence and tries to run away to hide back with Circus. He and his daughter find Mora, and she asks him to leave Annie with her, but he refuses, saying he will take her home with him. Annie reassures her father that she will be fine. Circus returns home and notices Ondine is not there, so he starts searching until he finds her under a small bridge. Ondine tells him the mysterious man was looking for her, so Circus should make a wish for the man to disappear. To legend, Circus can grant wishes. Ondine replies that she will disappear too. She says she wants to go to sleep, so Circus carries her back to the house. On the other hand, Mora leaves the place drunk while carrying her husband and Annie in the van, and soon they collide with that mysterious subject, thus causing an accident to his family. Moments later, Circus and Ondine meet passing through the same place, but soon they notice that there was an accident, so they realize that it is Annie. Circus heads to the hospital. Then he wakes up and asks his father what happened, but he tells him he doesn't know. In the hallways, they carry the mysterious subject on a stretcher. Then he realizes that Ondine is in that place, so he shouts to the woman that he will look for her when leaves the hospital. Then a doctor tells Circus that Alex passed away, although his kid is compatible with Annie, so they will have to operate on the girl to take advantage of this moment. On the other hand, Ondine goes to that man, so the subject claims her for speaking another language, and then asking her to come home, but she refuses since now she has a family in that place. Later, Syracuse is glad that his daughter has came out of the operation well, so the man believes that Ondine's wish came true in reality. The next day, Syracuse and the others attend Alex's funeral. Then Maura tells him that he can have custody of Annie, but in exchange he will have to get her out Ondine of her life. Then Maura invites Syracuse to have a drink. So the man decides to drink due to his lack of willpower, breaking his streak of sobriety due to the night. Syracuse leaves the bar, so he goes to Ondine and tells her that he will take her home the next day. Syracuse takes Ondine to a lighthouse, but upon arrival he begins to try to aggressively towards the woman as he is still under the influence of alcohol. Moments later, Syracuse tells Ondine that she will be fine in that place. Then the fisherman returns to the boat. Ondine notices this, so she tries to catch up with him. Then the man tells her that she is surely not human, so their relationship is impossible, and then abandon the girl, but Ondine refuses the idea, so decides to dive into the sea to try to go after him at night. Syracuse takes his daughter to his house. Then Annie asks him about Ondine, to which he replies that he had to leave. But Annie mentions that she will return since she left something important the next day. And television, then she sees a program in which a man sings the same song that Ondine sang. Then Syracuse realizes that that song is an Icelandic Dino. He realizes that he made a mistake when he abandoned to Ondine. Syracuse begins to search for Ondine until he manages to find her, and notices that the woman is lying on the ground, so the man covers her. Then Ondine confesses to him that she is a fugitive narcotics in Romania with that mysterious man who is actually her husband. Later, her husband made her escape by swimming with the merchandise until she became unconscious in the water, being rescued by Syracuse. The man asks her for her real name. She answers that she is Joan. They arrive home. Then they meet her husband of Joan, called Vec, so he tells them that he will end in life, and if Ondine does not, he tells him where he has the merchandise. But soon Syracuse begins to fight the man. Minutes later, and an ally of Vec arrives, so he threatens them with finishing off the life of Syracuse, so the woman decides to show him the place where she has the drugs to her husband. They go to the place where they had buried the object covered in seaweed, but they notice it's not there, and mentions that she changed the object's place, and she really believed it was the seal skin from Joan, and tells them that the object is in the lobster traps, so VC together with the man. They try to take out the merchandise, and soon Joan remembers that her husband does not knows how to swim, so he decides to push him and his partner. Vec tries to save his merchandise before his life, but soon he dies in the water, and moments later the police take Ondine away in a patrol car. Days later, the father tells Syracuse that Ondine will be deported, but the man mentions to her that he will marry the woman for that he can obtain citizenship, and thus be able to stay in Ireland. And Syracuse and Ondine gets married, so they manage to have a new family with their daughter in a movie. And